Jean-Paul Sartre, Existentialism and Human Emotion. I like to start out with some of my favorite quotes from Sartre. He says, "If you are lonely when you are alone, then you're in bad company." As an introvert, I relate to that. Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. We'll see that freedom is a big philosophical concept for Sartre. Everything has been figured out except one thing, how to live your life. Do you think I count the days? There is only one day left, always, starting over. It is given to us at dawn and taken away from us at dusk. If I had a single word to describe Sartre's existentialism, that word would be freedom. It kind of is expressed in his very famous slogan. Existence precedes essence. I remember in graduate school learning all about essences, the forms of Plato that were eternal and immutable. In medieval philosophy, those Platonic forms, became the essences that were created by God. And it was the nature of all things to actualize in life their predetermined end or purpose, or telos. Of course, with Sartre, there is no predetermined end or purpose to human life or your life. You're thrown into existence without reason or cause. Existence is inherently absurd. What you will be, what your life will become is totally up to you. It'll be the sum total of your choices, not some predetermined essence. We create our essences through our actions, through our acting. And for Sartre and this brand of existentialism, there is no one or no thing you can look to for direction. There's no God, no scientific theory, no moral theory, no instinct, only yourself. It's all up to you. This is a dizzying freedom. I think it was Kierkegaard who talked about this dizzying freedom, and Sartre very much read Kierkegaard. But this dizzying freedom produces forlornness, this sense that you're left all alone, that you're abandoned to yourself to be free to choose, Now, if I could use two words to describe Sartre's existentialism, it would be freedom and responsibility, So he says, you are condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, you're responsible for everything that you do, Again, you and you alone are responsible for the choices that you will make, and you have to choose, but this responsibility produces anguish or Angst, a great German word, anxiety, in the face of that responsibility, Now, if I had three words to describe Sartre's existentialism, it would be freedom, responsibility, and authenticity, To be authentic is not to shirk your responsibility, but in the face of forlornness and anxiety, Angst, you choose your path, you invent your life for yourself. And that's pretty exciting stuff. Father Flanagan, my PhD advisor at Boston College, recalled how when he was a philosophy student in the 60s in the US, how exciting it was to read the existentialists like Sartre. This was a philosophy, dealing with real life issues like fear and dread and shame and voyeurism, relationships and sex. It was a philosophy you could really live. There was no tedious, metaphysical arguments about what is real. There was no, impossible to resolve epistemological conundrums about how we know and how do we know that we know. There was no abstract, obtuse, moral theories that could be twisted to support any conclusion. There was no sterile analytical attempts to reduce language to formal logic. No, this was a philosophy for the cafe, for the street, for the bedroom, for life. This was a philosophy that took your life as you experienced it as its subject matter. It was a philosophy of action, not reflection. We constantly must create ourselves, thrown into action. We have to create ourselves through our actions, through our choices. It all started, one might say, this existentialist movement, at least for Sartre, sometime in late 1932 or early 1933 in a Parisian bar where he was on break from teaching school. He was there with his lover, Simone de Beauvoir, and a school friend, Raymond Aron. And Raymond had just gotten back from Berlin, where he had studied with Edmund Husserl, his new, phenomenological method. And he was explaining to Sartre what this new philosophy made possible. And Aron supposedly said to Sartre, as they sat there drinking apricot cocktails in the bar, Aron said, with this new philosophy, with this new philosophy, you can talk about this apricot cocktail and make philosophy out of it. De Beauvoir said Sartre turned pale when he heard this. Sartre, towards the end of his life, said that when Aron had said this, it knocked him out. I mean, just think, any ordinary object like that cocktail can be the entryway to philosophy. Any normal human experience can, under philosophical analysis, reveal the depths of the human condition. Our fear, our dread, our anxiety about life, about love, about sex, about death, about jealousy, even the sight of your lover's breasts, all become legitimate topics for philosophical examination. This movement may very well have, had its beginning in this cafe in Paris. Of course, a lot of philosophers trace existentialism back through Blaise Pascal and through him to St. Augustine of the 4th century. Others see the beginning of existentialism with Soren Kierkegaard and the realist 19th century novelists like Dostoevsky. Nietzsche also seen as playing a role when he killed God and swept the horizon clean of any transcendental or otherworldly values. But it was Sartre who turned existentialism into a philosophical movement. Sartre and de Beauvoir did not live lives that conformed to societal expectations, nor did they accept the social roles that a man or a woman or a teacher or a philosopher was supposed to step into. They invented their lives and their relationship for themselves and took responsibility for it. They argued and lived their lives according to this idea that you could never be reduced. A person could never be reduced to a role. One's identity was never fixed because you must keep acting, keep choosing, and keep creating until you die. And until then, we're always works in progress. To refuse that responsibility for your freedom, that responsibility to constantly create, invent, and choose, was to live an inauthentic life. I should mention that this notion of responsibility in Sartre's existentialism was also, in some sense, a recognition that you were responsible for how your choices affected others. So we should be considerate of others and consider their interests. I only say that because existentialism was not an excuse for narcissism or selfish behaviors. Yet there is no one and nothing outside of yourself that can tell you what the right thing to do is. You're on your own. Just something about Sartre. He was a very small man, barely 5 foot tall, with prominent ears and eyes that pointed in different directions. His almost blind right eye wandered on its own without regard to the left eye, it was said. Raymond Aron, who I've already mentioned, described Sartre like this. He said, quote, "His ugliness disappeared as soon as he began to speak, as soon as his intelligence erased the pimples and swellings of his face." Another person said of his appearance, Sartre's appearance, his face could never be ugly because it was illuminated by the brilliance of his mind, which had the honesty of an erupting volcano and the generosity of a newly plowed field. Interesting description. Sartre was to become somewhat of a sex symbol in France. On the 28th of October 1940, 1945, he gave a public talk at the Now Club in Paris. No one expected the huge crowds that showed up to hear him speak. He was kind of like Elvis or the Beatles. One journalist reported that women swooned at the sight of Sartre. Though I don't know how they saw him standing only at 5 foot tall. His lecture became the book, Existentialism and Humanism, from which our reading is taken. The essay, and I hope you've read it, the essay centers on the story of an ex-student of Sartre who had to make a difficult decision, whether to leave for England to join the Free French forces and leave his mother behind, or to stay and care for his mother and not go and fight against the Nazis. Some background for this student, right? His only sibling, a brother, had already been killed by the Germans, and his father had turned collaborator and deserted his family. So this student was all his mother had to live for. So what was the right thing to do? Should he stay? Should he stay and do the right thing for his mother, or should he join the fight and do the right thing for the many? I mean, what or who could he appeal to in order to make the right decision? And here's an interesting place to stop for a moment and consider for a moment, right? What is it like to be faced with such a choice? Have you ever been faced with a choice like that between two competing values? I thought about this. I've had students come to me before with similar, well, not similar dilemmas, but choices like this, whether they should perhaps stay in school and graduate or get a job to support their families. Some have come and said before they were trying to decide whether to get a job right out of college or to go to graduate school. On a deeper level, some students have come to me and said that they had to choose whether to stay in the religion of their youth for their parents' sake or whether to follow a different path. We all will have or have had already difficult choices to make in life. So how should we make them? Who could help us? Who can help us make this choice? Who could help this student make his choice? Sartre first says that the student considered consulting his religious authorities, Christian doctrine. But what would they say? Well, love your neighbor. But in this case, is the neighbor his mother or the Free French forces? The priest might say to him, do good. But what was good in this case? Helping his country or helping his mother? His thoughts turned to philosophy, to ethical theories. But how could utilitarianism help him? Are the better consequences in his uncertain efforts with the Free French forces, or with the more certain but limited efforts with his mother? What about a Kantian ethics? Kant says, never treat another person as a means but always as an end. But if he stays and treats his mother as an end, then he's treating his countrymen as a means, and of course, vice versa. So there was no help in ethical theories. So neither religion nor ethics could get him all the way to his decision. So next, the young man considered his instincts, his feelings. If he loves his mother more than his desire for adventure, action, and vengeance, then he'll stay. If not, he'll leave. But how do you assess which feeling is stronger, so better loved? Sartre says only by acting on it. And here, of course, is the vicious circle. He wanted the feelings to justify the action, but it seems he needs the action to justify the feeling. So that's a dead end or a vicious circle. So how do you know what the right thing to do is? In the end, Sartre says simply, you are free, therefore choose. There is no religious sign or ethical theory or feeling that can make the decision for you. Even if you consult religious sources or moral theories or your feelings, in the end, you'll still be left alone to choose for yourself and to accept responsibility for the life you create through your choices. Sartre says that what you choose matters. He argues that you should make your choices as if you were choosing on behalf of the entire human race. taking the burden upon yourself for how humanity evolves. Just think about that for a moment, right? Whenever what Sartre is saying is, it's a big ask really, but in every choice, consider it as if you were making it for all of humanity, a deep responsibility there. Sartre says, there is no traced out path to lead man to his salvation. He must constantly invent his own path, but to invent it he is free, responsible, without an excuse, and every hope lies within him. Of course, there was resistance to Sartre's existentialism. The Catholic Church placed his books, all of them, on its index of prohibited books in 1948. Others attacked his ideas. In fact, this is an excerpt from one criticism. I think it's pretty really vivid. It said, describing Sartre's philosophy, quote, a sickening mixture of philosophic pretentiousness, equivocal dreams, physiological technicalities, morbid tastes, and hesitant eroticism, an introspective embryo that one would take distinct pleasure in crushing. Wow. Anyway, for Sartre and the existentialists, existence is a choice, not a philosophical theory. And freedom is to choose to act in the face of the forlornness of one's life and the anxiety and anguish of responsibility. To all of us, Sartre is saying, you are free, therefore choose. Sartre's public funeral happened on April 19th of 1980. 50,000 people lined the streets for the funeral. I don't know if you want to watch this. This might come up, kind of a scene from his funeral in France. In a moment, you'll see the truck with all of the flowers. Behind it comes the hearse. Everyone's trying to get a view. Look at all of the people lining the streets for his funeral. There you see it. Of course, Sartre always turned down any kind of state honors, so this was not a state funeral. There you see the truck with the flowers. Interesting fact, he was buried. Oh, there you can see the hearse behind the truck. There's the hearse. I think the only person inside it besides the driver was Simone de Beauvoir. There you see some famous French philosophers following behind. Again, Sartre was, they're taking the casket out. Sartre had this public burial, but a week later, we'll get rid of that now. A week later, here we go. A week later, his body was dug up, and he was cremated, and his ashes reburied in a small plot in the same cemetery, where 6 years later, Simone de Beauvoir, her ashes were interred next to his. In any case, Sartre's philosophy asks us, given that we are free, how can we use our freedom well in the face of challenging times? Of course, when he asked this question, it was the end of World War II, the massive destruction of European cities and civilization, as well as the horrific violence and cruelty of the American atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He asked his students in mid-1940s, what kind of world they wanted. Nothing was stopping them, he said, but their own choosing. Did they want to choose to create or destroy? It was up to them to decide. I think this question, what kind of world do you want, is still relevant to you, especially today in the world that has essentially stopped with the coronavirus. when the world starts back up, what world will you create? Too often when we look into the future, we imagine a wasteland. It is a dystopian place where automation has taken all the jobs, so most people are unemployed or underemployed. The environment is inhospitable and even poisonous. Governments have collapsed or been overtaken by populist authoritarian leaders. The wealthy have walled themselves off from the impoverished masses and live lives of wasteful opulence while the many starve. Listening to cable news or talk radio, this sounds like the direction we are heading. I think, however, this view is a consequence of our cognitive bias for the negative. Why not try instead imagining a different future? Imagine a world where you wake up and your biggest worry is not how to survive another day at the soul-destroying job you hate, or whether you and your family will have enough to eat or a place to stay, or if you can pay your bills. No, your biggest concern is how you're going to divide your time between the job you love and the leisure and recreational time you enjoy. Because now you only have to work 4 hours a day because of the time-saving productivity provided by automation. So there's lots of leisure time in which you are learning a new skill, so you can contribute more to your community, where you serve as a part-time citizen legislator in the local democratic council. Why can't we create that world? I think we can, and we can start today. We live in an age of abundance. I think we are close to breathtaking technological advances in areas such as healthcare, communication, energy, and materials and food production. These developments have the potential to eliminate food and energy shortages, create approaches to medicine that will enable access to good healthcare for everyone, and create a true Internet of Things, which will connect the world, reduce costs, and eliminate barriers to life-changing services. These advances, I think, will accelerate the movement towards a demonetization of trade, which means, as in bartering, engaging in trade without the exchange of money, and also the dematerialization of goods and services. So fewer consumer items needed to do more and more things, like a smartphone that can perform as a phone, a camera, and a computer, so an item replacing 3. This all makes possible local self-sufficiency with global connectivity. These innovations will replace the consumer economy with the sharing economy, where access, not ownership, is desired choice. These changes could, if we choose, revolutionize our view of politics, economics, and society for the benefit of all humanity and the whole environment. We will soon have the wealth, resources, and technology to provide everyone on the planet a decent quality of life, a life of human dignity that all persons deserve, with minimal impact on the environment. Today, the scarcity is in our imagination and models, not in our abundant resources or technical capabilities. I believe we have the will to achieve such a life. Most people, rich and poor, in every country and place, are good, trustworthy, caring, and want to contribute to creating a world without poverty and prejudice and without war and violence. What we lack are the political, economic, and social models to make this possible. But it's up to us. All we have to do is to choose this future, and we can choose it today. So again, with Sartre, we would ask, how will you use your freedom to create a better world? You are free, so choose. Anyway, the code for this lecture, the quiz, on Canvas is 1980, the year of Sartre's death. Thanks.